Today, we examine another 1920s-1930s aircraft design that was rather odd, a time when many non-aviation experts thought that if you put enough wings or motors on anything, it would fly. Russia supplied the Caproni Ca.60 and Tupolev Ants-20. Germany contributed the Dornier DOX, and Italy came up with the bizarre Caproni Ca.60 Noviplano. This aircraft doesn't appear aerodynamic. Spoiler alert, it didn't fly well either, but its history is still very intriguing. In 1908, Italian aviator Giovanni Caproni started the Caproni aircraft manufacturing firm. Giovanni intended to expand its influence in the post-war commercial airline business after its success during World War I. Caproni planned to convert several wartime bombers into civilian transports. He had really grand aspirations. The flying boat as a big transport was gaining popularity among designers worldwide, including Italy. Giovanni, who'd discussed huge flying boats since 1913, implemented his notion in early 1919 by patenting a revolutionary design. Like many other designers, he wanted to develop a breakthrough airplane that could carry over 100 people. Thus, he started his design planning with a lot of precautions. Safety was crucial. Thus, he constructed his aircraft to be as reliable as possible. First, he would power his new aircraft with multiple engines so it wouldn't crash if one or two failed. Some new planes had 3 engines. 4 powered some of the larger ones. Giovanni's grandiose and mechanically safe ideas required 8 engines just to be safe. Its seaplane architecture allowed it to land safely and easily on big, smooth bodies of water, adding a second layer of reliability. It might also serve more places as a seaplane, he thought. Although many countries lacked airport facilities, those with coastlines possessed enormous bodies of water. In September 1919, Caproni sponsored air fair at their plant to promote the new design. After starting preliminary construction of the aircraft, they had enough desire and support to build a vast new hangar near Lake Maggiore to finish the Noviplano. A crew of contractors, mostly from Caproni's past, gathered to construct the gigantic aircraft. The US ambassador to Italy, Robert Johnson, visited Giovanni's hangar in late 1920 and was startled and amazed by his new aircraft. Despite its ridiculous appearance for 1920, it was still a large flying boat with remarkable craftsmanship after all. 3 sets of triple-stacked wings from the Caproni Ca.4 triplane bomber supported the hull. Flight control surfaces were ailerons on each wing, which span just over 98 feet. Critics suggested the aircraft's lack of a traditional tail assembly would hinder its design. Therefore, the 8 horizontal stabilizers were placed in the rearmost wings. Giovanni noted that the plane could be piloted with one hand, hoping to provide its stability. Thankfully, they never tried that. The Noviplano retained its original configuration with 8 engines. The American-made 27-liter 400-horsepower Liberty L12 V12 engines were used. 8 engines turned 8 propellers forward-aft. 2 engines in a central hub drove a 4-blade propeller and a pusher propeller in the forward wing. The 2 engines on either side of this nacelle drove 2-blade propellers forward. Rear engines were similar, but the outside nacelles engines powered pusher propellers instead of board-facing ones. All nacelles had radiators to cool the engines, and the 2 center ones had open-air cockpits. Each cockpit had a flight engineer who managed engine power based on pilot directions. Pilots and engineers communicated via sophisticated control panels with switches and lights because direct communication was not yet available. The cockpit was open and located above the main fuselage, housing the pilots and co-pilots. This fuselage ran the length of the aircraft, and many thought it looked more like a floating lake home rather than a passenger airliner. The Noviplano's dozens of big windows offering a panoramic perspective of the globe likely contributed to this. The 8 V12 engines were positioned some height above the fuel tanks in the roof of this enormous cabin around the central wing assembly. Thus, primitive ram air turbines were used to pump fuel up to them. The Noviplano was a huge hydrofoil designed to withstand the forces of takeoff and landing on water. The main hull and 2 side floats under the central wing assembly provided stability while the aircraft was afloat. Alessandro Guidoni, a prominent seaplane designer, created the Noviplano's hull and floats from scratch, resulting in a unique and distinctive design. The massive airplane was finished and ready for test flights in January 1921. Its completed length was 77 feet, wingspan was 98 feet 5 inches, height was 30 feet, and it weighed 14 tons empty and 25 to 26 tons fully loaded. It was never designed or expected to break airspeed records. The slow-moving 81-mile-per-hour craft was planned to ferry 100 passengers over 356 nautical miles. Several delays prevented Giovanni Caproni from realizing his goal. The launch ramp was extended from the hangar due to the lake's reduced water level, resulting in some wing ribs of the Noviplano being snapped during movement. On February 9th, the Noviplano was finally put into the water, and to everyone's relief, she stayed afloat. The aircraft underwent surface water maneuvers to test its water handling and to guarantee the hull and framing could withstand the necessary stresses. Giovanni and several Italian aviation leaders watched these maneuvers along with aviation journalists. The aircraft's impressive design wowed many, but some remained skeptical. One onlooker compared it to a Spanish Armada remnant, which was unfortunate and unfair as rough weather halted demonstrations that day. Unexpectedly, early testing discovered the aircraft was too light, especially towards the bow, which caused its stern to be forced into the water during acceleration tests, leaking water into the fuselage. The bow was intentionally filled with weight for the next testing because previously the aircraft started lifting before her test pilots realized it. After several successful tests, Giovanni felt confident enough to start Noviplano test flights. We debate the aircraft's genuine test flight here. One source says the aircraft left the water on February 12, 1921. The Giovanni Caproni Aerospace Museum dates the maiden flight to March 2nd. We shall assume the latter. The ballasted Noviplano lifted off for a brief but stable flight. Still, the plane tended to pitch up and climb rapidly. On March 4th, the plane accelerated again over the ocean on the second flight. The aircraft's nose rose up as the pilots drew the stick back at 70 miles per hour, but it continued to rise swiftly. The pilots decreased throttle, but the Noviplano had already achieved a dangerous angle of pitch, and its tail dropped rapidly as the rear triple wing stalled and hit the sea, followed by the nose. The hit folded the forward wing and buckled the plane's nose. Interestingly, the aircraft center stayed practically intact. Pilots and flight engineers did not suffer significant injuries. Due to delays, Giovanni Caproni and his photographer missed this incident. No photographs exist of this flight or the event, although many exist of the damaged Noviplano. Different hypotheses explain the accident. Some say the pilot had to lift up rapidly to avoid a lakeside passenger boat. Another theory is that the Noviplane's center of gravity shifted to the rear during takeoff due to the sandbags used as ballast to imitate passenger weight. The latter is likely right, but the incident's main cause is still often debated. The damaged Noviplano would sadly never fly again. The attempts to drag it ashore by boat destroyed it further, and Caproni couldn't afford to rebuild all the wooden sections. Giovanni lobbied for a smaller Noviplano, but shifting Italian politics prevented funding, and the project was abandoned. Giovanni Caproni believed in the Noviplano's historical significance and loved preserving Italian aviation history. The Caproni Museum in Trento, Italy displays two pontoons, the lower front section of the main hull, a control panel, and a Liberty engine. A fairly recent 2013 Studio Ghibli film, The Wind Rises, brought the plane back to popularity and boosted its notoriety by featuring the plane in numerous scenes.